You might think you know the story of King Midas. The story of the king who got his wish granted and found it to be a curse instead, right? You might think this story is a tale about greed and the falsity of material wealth. But what if I told you that was wrong? That you've been lied to about what this story is truly warning you about? That greed was just scratching the surface on the golden box of morality which this tale contains. Would you believe me? Well then, let me tell you my perspective on this story of loss, life, and transformation. The story of King Midas, at its core, revolves around the tragedy of getting what you think you want without understanding the consequences. We all know the story, I'm sure, but for those who do not, I will give a quick summary. King Midas one day finds a satyr in his rose garden. He does not get angry about this, but instead shows hospitality and treats the satyr as a guest for 10 days in his palace. On the 11th day, the satyr says he must return to his master and wishes to introduce him to King Midas. The king agrees and follows the satyr, whom, to the king's disbelief, takes him to the Greek god Dionysus. The god thanks the king for his kindness and offers to let him choose any reward he desires. The king asks for the ability to turn everything he touches into gold, imagining that this will bring him happiness and fulfillment. At first, he delights in the newfound ability, changing a twig, a stone, and even the very flowers of his garden. But once he realizes that he can no longer enjoy simple pleasures, as food and drink turn to gold at his touch, things begin to show their somber truth for the king. Even his beloved daughter came to him sad that the flowers were no longer alive, and as he reached out to comfort her, turned her to gold before his very own eyes. King Midas saw his gift becoming a curse. He called out to Dionysus to reclaim this power, and the god did so, letting Midas wash away his gift in the river. And all things washed in the river will also return to as they were. So, this story seems simple enough. A man gets what he wishes for and regrets it after. The gaining of gold or wealth being a vice for the king, and him learning that it is life and his family that he truly wants, that greed is the enemy of man. This may be the simple reading of the tale, but again, I say it's not the right one. King Midas and his warning are not of greed, but a dire warning of addiction and cross-addiction. Midas's desire for the golden touch mirrors the craving or urge for someone's DOC, believing that the next substance or experience will finally satisfy them. Initially, it might seem like a solution, but it quickly turns into an all-consuming force that ruins everything they touch. The golden touch is a poetic and symbolic showing of how someone might turn every aspect in their lives into a means to feed addiction. Whether you experienced it yourself or saw it happening to someone else, I think many may have seen the process of addiction slowly but surely corrupting each aspect and facet of a person's life. Relationships, hobbies, even basic human needs like sleep or self-care become secondary to the need for the substance or the behavior. Every outing into the world or every action inside the house, it becomes a means to feed the urge. Each moment of clarity and thought is spent not living in the moment with a family member or friend, but time spent figuring out where the next spot is, the next dose. Just as Midas transforms everything he touches, whether he wants to or not, addiction corrupts everything touched as well. This applies doubly to cross addiction. Someone may give up cigarettes and then turn to online shopping. They may give up alcohol and turn to food, so on and so on. It's not about the DOC or the maladaptive behavior per se, but the escape that those things provide. The Midas touch, the underlying trauma, turns everything into a bad coping behavior or an escape, never to address the actual issue. It will transform all things into a tool of addiction instead of a tool for life. That desire can lead to a kind of distortion in which even what was once meaningful or healthy in one's life becomes twisted and transformed. That is the tragic paradox on display, the cross addiction at work, and the true moral warning of this so an ancient tale. One might end up with all the wealth, or all the power, or all the access to whatever it is they crave, but it never feels like enough. In fact, as is often the case, the more one acquires or experiences, the more their lives disintegrate in other ways. It's the tragic irony that Midas's wish, like addiction, ends up being a prison. But Midas's eventual release from the curse when he's asked to be rid of it represents the potential for recovery, the possibility of letting go, washing away the sins and the shame and the learned behaviors, and instead learning to re-engage with life in a healthy, meaningful way, restoring balance, reconnecting with what truly brings happiness. For King Midas, this was easy, as it's a myth about gods and magic. But in real life, it's not so simple. It will take work, mindfulness, and in many cases, a whole lot of therapy, tears, sweat, and blood. It will take a lot to learn how to have one's touch transform things not into tools of escape, but tools of healing. The process is not as simple as bathing in a river, but it can be just as freeing. So yes, the myth of King Midas and his touch is an allegory for greed and temptation. But that's only the surface, and if one digs a little deeper, I think we find the true meaning of the story. It touches on the idea that the quest for more can ultimately be self-destructive, and how the addictive cycle works to distort and dehumanize everything it has contact with, leaving only emptiness in its wake. Such an enduring story says to all of those thinking that there's an abnormality or shame to this, that King Midas wasn't greedy. He was an addict. And if a king can be an addict, well, then can't anyone be? And lastly, most of all, it tells us that in the end, there's still hope, if one is willing to fight for it. Thank you so much for making it this far into the video. Let me know what you think about this theory in the comments below. Do you agree with my perspective, or am I looking too deeply into this? If you enjoyed what you saw, please leave a like. And of course, please subscribe if you would enjoy even more discussions on myths, legends, and folklore. And as always, thank you, listeners.